Hi guys, it's your photographer Ogun Shotted. I'm a portrait photographer, street photographer, and also a visual storyteller. I pretty much tell stories with my images. So I uploaded this picture about 2 days ago, and I've had tons of people telling me they want to see the workflow and how I was able to achieve, the specific color grade that I eventually, or that I used in conclusion for this image, or how I was able to achieve it. So I decided to run a short tutorial to shed some light on that. So this is our model Shoshoileke. I shot the image a while back. It was pretty much a test. This was while we're doing the test shoot, so I decided to work on the image. Out of my leisure time, I decided to work on this specific image. So here we are. My procedures are pretty simple. I start with the removing of spots on the skin, and I do this using the clone stamp tool. And after which, let's take a look at the image so we can see what the image was like before using the clone stamp tool, and now, before, now, before, now. So we've seen the effect of taking out the spot. That's actually my procedure. I mean, there are other steps. There are times that you want to do your frequency separation and then remove your spot thereafter, but I just normally like to go through this procedure. I mean, everybody has different preference and different paths we take to achieve a good result. The major thing is, at the end of the day, we get a good image. So after taking out the spots on the skin, I like to run my frequency separation. Now, there are two different frequency separation techniques that I normally use, which of course has, no predefined a predefined time that I must use a specific frequency separation. I mean, there is one that is the general one, that's the one that uses the Gaussian Blur, and the other one is the median. That's under noise, the median. Now, the simple difference between the two, it's not much, except for the fact that the one with the median leaves the edges of the image, intact. It gives you that. But if you're careful with the Gaussian Blur, you can still have the edges, as intact as you have it currently in the image that you're looking at. So now I'm going to start by duplicating this layer into two. So I'm going to name this the low frequency, and I'm going to name this the high frequency layer. These are for two images. The low frequency and high frequency layer. So what frequency separation basically does is separates the texture from the color in your image, so that you can work on the texture without affecting the color. You can work on the color without affecting the texture of the image. So the low frequency is the color of the image, which helps to blend the skin tone and the skin texture, the skin tone, and the high frequency is the texture. So I'm going to disable the high frequency by turning this off, and I'm going to apply the Gaussian Blur on the low frequency. So what my technique is, the farther away the picture is, the lower the Gaussian Blur radius that I use, and the closer up the image, the more the radius of the Gaussian Blur that I use. So ordinarily, I think I'll go for 10. Yeah, this image, I think I'm pretty convinced that this would blend the skin proper. So let's go with 10 as the radius for the Gaussian Blur. So for the high frequency, what we do is we come to image, we apply image, and then we make sure that this is set to low frequency. That's the layer selected here. When we are applying the image, it will be set to low frequency. As we can already see the texture of the image, being separated from the color. And then we have the scale to 2 and the offset to 128. Your blending option must be subtract, so you can subtract the texture from the color. So here we go. We already have that. So what I pretty much like to do in this case, in order not to lose this settings that I have already created, from the onset, I like to duplicate the high frequency as well as the low frequency layer. And after duplicating it by using the command J, I come just right in between here, and I hold my alternate key on my mark and then click. So what this does is it makes you work on the color, on the copy of both the high and the low frequency layer, as well as retaining the original, you know, the original content of the skin. So in case where you've pretty much gone wrong with your, or you've overdone it, you can just come back, duplicate, and then continue from where, the settings, picked up from. So now what we're going to do is, after separating the color and after merging, what I do, okay, after separating the low and the high, after making copies of them, I like to match both layers together in a group in order to have a smooth workflow. So I use my Command G to group them together, and then I name it frequency separation. So this is for my frequency separation technique. So what I do is, there are some people that like to use the brush tool, but I prefer the mixer brush tool, and the reason being that using the mixer brush tool helps you understand the skin a lot better in terms of the transition between the highlight to the shadow, and how to be very careful, especially when brushing over the skin. It's a very sensitive tool, but then I prefer it. I mean, some will still go for the brush tool. So basically that's that. So we're going to go with, for the high frequency layer, not the copy, the high frequency layer, we're going to return that to linear light. We're going to change the blending option to linear light. So now we have our original image. As you can see, the before and the after, there's really nothing, that has changed. We still have the image. Now we're going to brush out the skin to even out the texture. So now we're coming to the low frequency copy. We pick the mixer brush tool. My mixer brush tool setting is usually like this. I think I've tried different setting over the time, and over time I've discovered that this is the setting that best works for me. My wet is usually set at 30, load at 50, mix at 15, and my flow at 100%. And that's pretty much how I work. So now with my mixer brush tool, I gently brush over, gently, not too much. I gently brush over the image, because you cannot afford to brush from your highlight to your shadow like this, hence you will end up with this, which is not very, 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 very nice to the eye. So very carefully I brush within each transition. Where the highlight is, I brush there. Where the shadow is, I brush within that region. I do not brush outside, or from the highlight to the shadow, from the shadows to the highlights. I stick within the specific zone. So while you're working on this, it's always advisable to check while you're doing it, to check, from time to time, to be sure that you've not overdone anything at any point. So we can see the before, now, before, now. So I think it's pretty much decent for that gives a desirable result at the end of the day. So if you're not satisfied, you just keep working until you're perfectly satisfied with what you have. So I think the image is pretty decent. So I'm going to take out this region, this spot here. I'm going to take it out very quickly using the clone stamp, if it works. So otherwise there are other techniques that you can use, like sometimes I use the patch tool depending on how serious the blemish is. I could use the patch, and I could also use the spot alien, but most of the time I use the clone stamp. It's pretty much worked for me in every situation that I found myself in. So I'm removing the spot on the high frequency layer, still trying to, you know, take out spot. I mean, I started out with the spot remover, but it wasn't enough. I mean, after blending the skin tone, I could see. So hence the texture layer that we separated, so I can still work on the spot while blending the skin tone. So let's just do a little bit more. On this side, I can see some disparities. No wonder. We all can see the difference between the brush tool and the clone and the mixer brush tool. It was very, very obvious there that something wasn't right. So let's zoom out so we can take a wider glance. Okay, so I'm just trying to even out the highlight so it falls on the cheekbone. Okay. So that's for that. Now, after we've finished, I think we've finished with the frequency separation now. I think I'm okay. So what I do next is I do the dodge and burn. So as we all know, dodge is for the highlight and burn is for the shadows. So I use my curves adjustment layer. Okay, sometimes in order to guide my eyes, you know, for the dodge and burn, I use the gradient map. So what I do in this case is I make it move from 0 to 255 instead of from 255 to 0. Okay, in case you do not know, it's from black to white instead of from white to black. So now, after doing this with the gradient map, I use the luminosity to return it back to its colored form. So separating the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows, I like to divide this so that I can easily tweak it. It's more or less like levels, but then it's another form. So this is just to guide your eyes, you know, working in the highlights and working in the shadows before we go into the subsequent ones. So after setting 50 here, I go to the brightness and then I change it to 50. So you can see the transition is a bit even here. So I do the same for here, 75. Don't worry about the current outcome, it will shape itself properly. So brightness 75, I do this at 25, and then the brightness of the color should be at 25. So we have the same image we had before. Now what we do in this case, we just tweak, just adjust. These are the shadows. I'm bringing the shadows in. I should also take note of the highlights because I need them out. No, we don't want the highlights in the midtones. We want it in the highlights. So you can see what we have here. We're getting the highlights of the same image back. So the highlight is back. So Now let's see what the before and the after looks like. Before, after. Even sometimes with this, I don't really need to go into dodge and burn, but then just to be properly precise, you know. I mean, with this myself, I don't think I need to go into dodge and burn, but let's just do it. Just for the sake of those that do not understand what dodge and burn is. So I do my curves. This is my burn. And this is my dodge. So I drag the mid-tone just a little bit towards the edge here, and then I invert it on the mask, on the layer mask. I do the same thing for this. Oh, sorry, this is levels. I'm supposed to bring in curves adjustment layer. This is for burn, and this is for dodge. So dodge is to brighten up the highlights, and burn is to darken the shadows. So I'm gonna invert this too. Then I pick my brush to brush out the highlights and the shadows. Now my brush, normally I do not go below 2 and I do not go above 2, just to see what I'm doing as I am doing it, so I don't overdo things. Yeah, so I can pretty much have a control over what I'm doing. So I pick the big brush, and depending on the area I'm working on, my hardness is set to 0, and the size depending on the area I'm working on, like I said. So okay, the hardness wasn't set. So now let's see, we're working on the burn now, which is the shadows. So 1, 2, I do not stroke more than that, so you can see. Oh, sorry. Now the foreground color should be white, not black. In order to switch this to the background color, I just press, or I hit the X on my keyboard. Otherwise, you just be stroking, because I'm supposed to stroke white on black, black on white. I was stroking black on black. Obviously, there wasn't going to be any difference in that. So I just stroke 1, 2, not too much. Can you see the difference? 1, before and now, before and now. I mean, it's pretty much there. You don't need to have that extremely dark 2. I like to stroke just 2 times, maybe because it's too flow. I don't know, but then it's just my system. 2. So let's see what we have. Before, now, before, now. It just gives me a good hand of things. 1, 2. So 1, 2. The places where the shadows I needed, I stroke. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then I stroke the collarbone. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 for the shadows. I'm just trying to make the shadows be where they ought to be. So I observe there's a little bit of dark spot here. It looks a little darker. So I just hit my X and I return the foreground to black and just brush over this a little bit. Yeah, that's even. So now that we have a properly evened one, just take out where there is excesses. And I return the foreground color to white. And I brush out. So I think so far so good. We're doing well. So in case of any discrepancies, you can always come back here with any thing that you think you're not doing right or you've not done well enough. You can just come back to the low frequency copy and hit your mixer brush tool, and then still even out whatever you think you've not evened out enough. I mean, you can still do this since you've not combined all the layers into one image, so you can still pretty much work with this. So we just concluded the shadows, which is the burn. We're going to do the highlights now with the brush, not the mixer brush tool. So I'm going to brush the shadow, the highlight, just the same way I did the shadows. 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Not too much. 1, 2. Not too much, just very slightly. 1, 2. Brushing the highlight on the mouth. 1, 2. The back. 1, 2. Just very mildly. 1. Okay, let's add a bit of contour here for the bone. I don't think it's necessary, so I'm going to take it out. So now that we have our dodge and burn in place, we can try to look at the preview. This is the before, which is rather looking very flat. And this is what we have now. You can see the image is already looking shiny, and we are yet to be done. So after doing our frequency separation on our dodge and burn, let's take a look at what the image was like. Okay, previous image, frequency separation, dodge and burn. Now we're going to color grade, but before I color grade, I like to have my image, properly set in terms of highlight to shadows. I could work around the levels for this, so let's see. I mean, there's really no particular procedure. I mean, it's just whatever works for you. I mean, whatever looks good for your image, whatever you feel is good for your image. I mean, it's good for your image after all. So I'm just trying to pop it up a little bit. That's pretty much what I use my levels for. Let's see before. You can see now I just added more life to the image. So let's see before, now, just very little, subtle. So now let's go into the color grading of this particular image. So let's create a folder, or a group rather, titled color grade. So the first thing I do, I reduce the saturation by going with the hue and saturation. So now I've reduced the saturation of my beautiful image. Now after doing that, now I like to play around with the dodge and with the selective color. I mean, that's what I use for majority of my color grading. I basically don't use color filter except when I want to just have an overall feel for the image. So selective color. Now we can see the image is looking brown. Then we want that dark feel, which we do not have yet. So we're going to work on the reds. Let's see. If we take out the reds, we have this. There's really no particular procedure that you must follow. I mean, whatever works for the image works fine. So if we take out the red, we see what we have. Taking the reds, we see what we have. So let's take out the reds just a little bit. Let's pop out. Let's put a little bit of magenta and then use the yellow. Or I think I'll put in the yellow. So let's see what we have before and now. So we just keep working until we're comfortable with the color grade. So I mean, some people will ask me, why don't you just do it in one image? I mean, I like to have a step-by-step procedure. That way I'm not losing any content and I'm not forgetting the steps that I took. That way I can easily revert. If I see that one step is not working, I can take it out and just go back to where it worked the most. So go to my yellow, and then I had a little bit of red in the yellows. So I had a little bit of yellow here, and then I put magenta. I think I'll take out yellow here. Put a little bit of red. Whatever works fine. So let's tamper with the red just a little bit more. So we're going to touch the contrast now, which is the blacks in this image. Just before just trying not to damage the image at the end of the day. Okay, so we're getting there. That's for the contrast. So let's go back to the red. Take it out just a little bit, just a little bit. Copy magenta. So let's see what the color grade is giving us so far, before and now, and we're not even there yet. So I mean, I could keep going on and on and on. It's really no specific, depending on the skin color, depending on the skin tone. I mean, that's what really matters. It's not like there is this particular thing that you have to do to achieve this. I mean, Photoshop is pretty much flexible. Perspective is what matters at the end of the day. How you see it. So let's work on the reds a little bit more. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on until I'm very satisfied. So okay. I want it to look too reddish. So let's put in a little bit of contrast. Let's work on the yellows. A little bit of contrast. Take out a little bit of red. Magenta gives yellow when you reduce, so one just has to be very careful here, because in just a split second you could damage your image. Sometimes when you look at the screen for too long, you tend to lose the color in terms of your eyes. I can barely tell what color I'm in right now. I'm just trying not to do it too much. Yellows. Oh god, I love Photoshop. So let's take out the saturation just a little bit more, or we can work on the previous saturation we had. So okay, I think we're arriving at that melanin. I observed something which I can easily correct before grouping any of the layers. So the transition here, it's not properly blended. Mix up brush too. Okay. So before I conclude the image, I like to apply curves. And under the presets, I go for darker. And then I multiply the darker. Now after multiplying, I reduce the opacity. Reduce the opacity to a point where I'm most comfortable. So let's see what this has done before and after. Before and after. I think I'm still having that reddish feel in the image, so we're going to try to take out that. I'm not sure. I think it's the magenta I have to reduce here. Yeah, I think it's the magenta. Take out a little bit of yellow. Maybe take out red. Okay, I think so far so good. We're around the corner. So to group all of this in one image, I'm just going to use the Command Alt Shift or Command Alternate Shift and E on my keyboard. And once I'm okay with that, I think we can just watch out what we've done so far. 3, 4, 5. Okay, this is the previous image. In just one, spot removal, frequency separation, dodge and burn, color grading, we have this in just 4 steps. I'm not going to call it 4 steps, but I think because we've grouped it, it's pretty much, explicit. I think in just 4 steps we've been able to achieve that melanin skin tone, which is really nice, I must say. So do not forget to follow me on YouTube at Ogunshot and subscribe to my channel at Ogunshot on YouTube. Please do not forget to follow my Instagram at Ogunshot and my Twitter at Ogunshot. I think everywhere it's at Ogunshot. So thank you for watching this, and have a beautiful day. Goodbye.